Hi, I'm Sean Keef. I'm a security engineer with Skybox Security, and I'll be demonstrating the Skybox Security Suite for you today. In this video demonstration, we will explore how Skybox can be used to manage next-generation firewalls. We're able to do this through our ability to collect and analyze Layer 7 as well as IPS information. In this demonstration, we'll tackle a common problem for many organizations, and that is the problem of having an overly permissive rule. Many tools out there can point out the fact that you have an overly permissive rule in your rule set, but few tools can help you deal with that specific problem. So we'll start off by looking at our rule policy. One of the things our rule policies show are overly permissive rules. So in this particular policy called any in two fields, I see firewalls that have rules that have any in two fields, which by most accounts would be considered an overly permissive rule. So I'm looking at my main firewall and rule number 9. If I open this up in an ACL editor, I can see that it is an overly permissive rule. I'm allowing the finance network to go to any destination for any service. When tackling the problem of an overly permissive rule and making a change on that rule, typically we want to understand what will happen when we make that change from 3 different perspectives. We're able to see how that change will affect security policy. If I got rid of that any rule, I'm certainly going to make security policy a little bit better. I won't have at least one of the violations in my any in two fields, and it may clear up some of the other policy violations that I have as well. The other side of that coin, though, is making sure that by getting rid of a particular rule, you're not going to break the network and stop access between 2 points that require that access for work to get done. We actually give you the ability to describe these paths. We call them critical service paths. And this is the flip side to policy. Typically, when people talk about security policy, it is usually used to describe things that shouldn't happen between 2 points. Our critical service path policy allows us to describe access that always should be available between 2 points on the network. This allows a company to describe paths that are needed to allow the business to run. So in this particular case, I have critical service paths. I have 4 checks happening in here, and anytime I make a change, I would always want to make sure that my critical service paths remained at 100% compliance. The third thing that we would want to understand when making a change is an understanding of how access will change between 2 points on the network by changing a specific rule. One of the features that we'll use in this process is our what if workspace. The what if workspace is a completely separate workspace that allows us to add rules, delete rules, and modify rules, and find out what the effect of those changes would be. At any point, I can take my live workspace, copy it over to my what if workspace, and run policy compliance checks against it, and see the effect of certain changes. In this particular case, with my main firewall, I've already made a change where I've taken rule number 9 out. So we can see in my live workspace, the rule exists in my ACL. In my what if workspace, we can see that that rule no longer exists. So now we're going to use the what if workspace to find out what the effect of that change would be. So let's start by switching over to our what if workspace and seeing what the effect would be of my critical service path. So right away I can see I have a problem. My critical service path has gone down from 100% compliant to now it's only 50% compliant. So I know right away that that rule was needed for something. It was needed for something that was important to run the business. One of the other views that we might want to look at is in our network map. We might want to understand what kind of access would be gained or lost by making that change. So I'm going to pick 2 points on my network, source and a destination. And inside of Access Analyzer, instead of just choosing the Analyze button at the bottom, up here at the top, I'm going to choose to compare it against my live workspace. If you remember, we're in our what if workspace right now. So we're going to compare what if against live. And I can see the results of that query pretty quickly. I can see that in my live model, 256 IP addresses were allowed to go between those 2 points on any protocol. In my what-if model, after removing that rule, I can see that I'm down to allowing only 6 services between point A and point B. So I get a very graphical view of what would be allowed by making that change. And again, I can click on these different ports and see the firewall rules that are allowing that access in either of these models, the live or the what-if model. So we've just seen how administrators can view the effect of removing an overly permissive rule. The next problem we'd like to tackle is how an administrator can create a more specific restrictive rule out of an overly permissive rule. For this, we'll need to go back to Firewall Assurance and look at our live model again. We'll start with our main firewall in Optimization and Cleanup, looking at rule usage. When Skybox collects log data from firewalls, we can analyze that against an ACL to break down the traffic into the individual IP addresses and services that were passed for overly permissive rules. So for Rule 9, I have any as a destination and any as a service. I can actually see the IP addresses of the traffic that was passed from this rule, and I can see the same thing on services as well. This is an automated function that gives an incredible amount of power to an administrator to be able to achieve a tighter rule set.